Thank you very much, Paul. Can you hear me? Is this better now? Okay, so I don't have any disclosures, apart from the fact that I actually supported Belgium in the World Cup, only because New Zealand wasn't playing, and unfortunately they failed to deliver the goods. So, the World Cup is big, really, really big. We're talking 3.4 billion people big. That's the number of people who would tune in on their TVs to watch the tournament. And it's not just the TV audiences, and to be honest, to put this into perspective, we're talking about half of the global population. And it's not just the TV audiences, it's the actual audiences as well. People who are going to buy tickets to go to the World Cup. 3 million will watch the matches physically in the stadiums. And to put that into perspective, that is 10% more than the total population of Qatar. And now, in a little bit more than 4 years' time, the World Cup is coming from the world's biggest country to the smallest country that's ever hosted it, Qatar. And of course, the question on everybody's lips is, are we going to be ready for this? And if you listen to the Supreme Committee of Delivery and Legacy, we definitely will be, in terms of infrastructure. In fact, if you listen to them, you would believe the World Cup is coming in 2 years' time, because they plan to deliver all the stadiums in 2 years. So this is a video that comes from the FIFA website. It's actually made by the Supreme Committee. This is the latest one I could find, and it dates to the beginning of this year. So obviously things have progressed since then. But here's an idea of what things are looking like at the moment.
باسم كل قطري وعربي أعلن عن جاهزية استاد خليفة الدولي لاستضافة كأس العالم 2022.
I didn't attach the whole video because it's too long. So if you want to see the rest of it, feel free to go to the FIFA website or to the website of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy. But it's impressive, isn't it? And in fact, it's not just the infrastructure that's getting ready, so are the hospitals. Hamad, this is from February this year, Hamad has done a course for their pharmacists to teach them about the WADA list and what is prohibited in sport. So everybody's getting ready for this. And what about you? Maybe I can ask you first a show of hands. Who here in this audience want to be involved in the FIFA World Cup in 2022?
We are.
Everybody, okay. Have you volunteered? Have you registered? Because this is the website where you can register to be a volunteer. And this website opened 3 weeks ago. And in 3 weeks' time, they got 176,000 people who've registered from all over the Gulf and also some other parts of the world. And obviously this will be a very exciting opportunity to participate in the world's biggest event. And why wouldn't we? But here's the thing. If we go as an Aspetar team, as you've pointed out, Philippe, we have a different responsibility. We're not just there to participate. Remember, our hospital's vision is to be a global leader in sports medicine. What does that mean? It means that we can't just be there. In fact, we can't even just be as good as everybody else. We have to be better than everybody else. And this means we have to do the medical equivalent of winning the World Cup. That's a totally different ballgame, right? So, I believe the only way to know how to win the World Cup is to know what's expected of you in the first place, to see what other people have done, and then to try and get better than that. And so this is where I was very fortunate to be invited by FIFA to be one of the VMOs, which is a venue medical officer at the World Cup in Russia. And this gave me a real first-hand experience of what it's like to be at the World Cup and provide medical service, what are the things that we need to know and the things that we need to do, and also to give me an idea of how we can learn from this experience to be better at the next World Cup. So first I have to say thank you very much to my bosses who made this possible, Dr. Frank, Dr. Scott, Mr. Khaled, Dr. Abdulaziz, and Mr. Mohammed. If it wasn't for them, this wouldn't have happened, and I wouldn't be standing here today talking to you. So, and I also want to say thank you very much to the sports medicine team. They had to work much harder to cover my clinical and non-clinical duties when I was away. It was a month. And I have to say I'm really fortunate to be part of this team. These people really know what teamwork is. They really know how to work towards one common goal. And I'm really grateful for that. So I want to spend the next half an hour or so talking to you about this experience in Russia and then what were the lessons that I've learned from it. So how can we learn from that? And I was sent to Samara, which was my venue. It's about an hour and a half's flight from Moscow. And it's actually a beautiful city. It's right on the river. It's on the confluence of the Samara River and the Volga River. And it was a closed city for a long time until 1991. You couldn't visit there as a tourist, and if you lived there, it was difficult to travel out of it. And the reason for that is because it was the center of the Russian aerospace industry. So this monument here on the left, this is the monument to space travel. And this is the rocket, the Vostok rocket. Actually, it's a full-scale model of the Vostok rocket that took the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, in 1961. And this is actually a graffiti of him on one of the tower blocks in Samara. And the locals tell me that apparently Yuri Gagarin came to visit Samara immediately after he arrived in Moscow because it was the first city that he visited in Russia because they built the rocket that brought him back safely to Earth. And you can see this theme of space flight and travel in the stadium as well. So this is the stadium in Samara, the Cosmos Arena, and it was designed to look like a UFO, unidentified flying object. And from a distance, it really did. And it was pretty impressive. It was one of the latest stadiums to be finished because it was so complicated in design. We really enjoyed working there. It took forever to walk around it. So in terms of Fitbit steps, it was very beneficial to work in the stadium. And it had a capacity of 45,000 people. It was going to host 6 matches. As you can see on the match schedule there, it was 4 group stage matches, 1 round of 16 match, and then a quarterfinal. And it was the last stadium together with Sochi to close before Moscow. So it was actually a very long tournament in that stadium. So these were the matches that came to us: the Costa Rica, Serbia, Denmark, Australia, Uruguay, Russia, and Senegal, Colombo. And of course, this is the one that the local people were really waiting for. And the atmosphere was absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, Russia didn't do so well. Until then they had, but that wasn't such a good match for them. And then, of course, Brazil and Mexico went through in the round of 16, and in the quarterfinals we had Sweden and England. And again, the atmosphere there was just unbelievable. So this is what it looks like at a FIFA competition in one of the venues. This is the FIFA venue team. So the GC, the general coordinator, he's the guy in charge. And he's responsible for everything that happens before, during, and after a match. And then he has all these people supporting him. That's me, the venue medical officer. And you can see that for many people, media, for example, have 2 people, security have 2 people, there were 2 venue manager assistants, and so on. So It's a big group, and then each one of these people have a local organizing committee counterpart, and sometimes more than one. So in your little area, you would be working with 2, 3, or 4 other people, and you're responsible for that area in the venue. And this is what the control room looked like at the stadium. And I have to say, I could see this is the aerospace industry, because it felt, the first time I walked in there, I thought I was walking into mission control. And I wanted to see which rocket was about to take off. And it was very tense in there. So I walked in and walked out as quickly as I could and tried not to go there again in the future. But they did a brilliant job from there. So this is what the medical services normally look like in a FIFA competition. You have the FIFA venue medical officer, that's me. Then you have your local organizing LOC counterpart. And then you have a doping control officer, also provided by the LOC, because my job was making sure the medical services were in place and doping control. And then the doping control assistant would also organize these chaperones, which help you with the doping control process. But in Russia, things were a bit different. And the reason was that the Russians didn't want to be involved in the doping control process. They didn't want to take any blame if something went wrong. And I think it was a very good move. And so what happened is FIFA provided a second VMO for each match. It wasn't the same person, it changed every time, which was really nice because it meant that we had 2 pairs of hands on every match day. And the Russians provided the chaperones, but they weren't allowed to be Russian citizens. So we had a very interesting mix of people from all over the world to help us with that. And the doping control assistant from the LOC basically became the assistant to the VMO. And the other big change in this World Cup was that previously the FIFA VMO used to sit in the VIP room, so you kind of had an overview of what was going on in the stadium, but for the first time we were actually on the bench. So we were with the field of play medical teams right next to the pitch, which was much more exciting than sitting in the VIP area. But of course a little bit more responsibility, because if something happened then you were on the pitch and you had to deal with the situation firsthand. So these were the people in Russia. So Armin, he's a thoracic surgeon. He was the VMO. And Dr. Natalia Spiridonova was, she's actually a gynecologist. And she was what was going to be the doping control assistant, but she became his assistant. And I have to say, these 2 people were incredible, absolutely incredible. They were everything you would want in a VMO. They were super organized, they were proactive, they were always available. But nothing was ever too much for them. I can't speak highly enough of them. So this is what we had. And remember, this is for the whole venue. So this is the whole city of Samara. We had 15 medical centers, 6 hospitals, with 1 big regional hospital as the reference center, 26 ambulances, and 251 medical staff in total. We also covered the last mile, which is the last area from the train station to the stadium, and of course the area that people go back to after the match when they're completely full of celebration. And then we had the Fan Fest, which was in one of Europe's biggest squares, and it could host 15,000 people. And as you can see, it was pretty busy for most of the matches. We also had 2 team hotels and a FIFA hotel, and then we had 2 training camps or training areas, and the Switzerland base camp was there as well. So we had to provide medical services to all of these. So I want to come back to the team. I've been to a few FIFA World Cups before, and I've worked with some great teams, but I have never worked with a team like this one. There was something really special about them. There was a kind of a cohesion, a sense of teamwork, a sense of passion, and I couldn't figure out why, how is it different for them? And you can see it even in these, the blue uniforms. Those uniforms were made by this team for this team. There were nobody else in Russia had the same uniforms. So I asked Armin, what did he do? How did he pick his team? And he said to me, he did the interviews himself, and they had to have 4 criteria. That was what he was looking for. Firstly, they had to be a good clinician. Secondly, they had to be a good person. Then they had to be a good team player. And fourthly, they had to be English speaking. And if they had all 4 of those, they were automatically on the team. If they only had 3, he would consider them, but only if the missing characteristic was the ability to speak English. And I thought this was fantastic because this is how you assemble a quality team, right? So this was my first and probably the most important lesson I learned in Russia. You need to put your best team on the pitch if you want to win the World Cup. We should think about this when we prepare for 2022. Not one of these players would have been selected because the coach thought, I ought to put this player on the pitch because of some political reason. He picked them because they were the right people for the job. So this is where I spend most of my time in the end. It's the Player Medical Center. It consists of the player medical room. This is like a mini ICU. It has all the equipment and the staff to deal with any emergency you can imagine that might happen on the pitch. This is the field of play posts. There were two of them, obviously, one on each side of the pitch. And this is the team. This is not the whole team, but this is part of the team that was responsible for that. And so they had 3 teams of 4 people each. Each head of the team would be an emergency physician and then 3 nurses or paramedics who would be helping them. And I really liked the way they set it up because you can imagine if you were on the field of play on the sideline, it's really exciting. But if you were in the player medical room and there's no injuries, you sit there the whole match and you don't even see the match. So what they did is they rotated the 3 teams through these positions throughout the tournament. And it kept them fresh and interested, and but it's still the same 12 people. And this is where I learned my second lesson. How do you win the World Cup? You don't just put your best team on the pitch, you keep your best team on the pitch. So don't keep on subbing them off or changing them for other people. Once they're in place, make sure it's the same people doing the same job throughout the whole tournament. So when I arrived there, the first job we had was to check all the equipment, and FIFA is really strict about equipment. They have a very particular list, what they want in the player medical room, what they want in the medical bag, etc., etc. And to be honest, it makes it easy because you don't need to think, should I or shouldn't I have this? You just follow the list, and it makes my job very easy because that list goes in advance. So all I need to do is just check, has this been done and is there any issue with it? But we also check down to details like the expiry dates on the drugs. So this is important because you can imagine if somebody walked into your room tomorrow and started checking the expiry dates on your drugs, you'd probably feel a little bit irritated, right? So we have to explain to people it's not because we don't trust them and it's not a reflection on them, it is just the protocol. And this is important, otherwise, and this will happen to us in 2022. FIFA will come in and check everything. And then we also had to check the staff, and we did a lot of training. And this is my third lesson, and this is where we actually already have a huge advantage here in Aspetar, because most of these doctors here were hospitals. In fact, all the staff were hospital staff. So they didn't have much experience with working at a big sporting event. And this is where, of course, we have a huge advantage because this is what we do, right? This is our daily bread and butter. So the third lesson I learned was you need to play the right people in the right positions. So pick the people who know the job, and then things will be much easier than if you pick people who've never done it before and have no idea what's going on. Not that these guys didn't, because they did a lot of training beforehand. So I'm just saying, in principle, they were actually very good in the end. So this is the training we did. Most of it revolved around how to deal with sudden cardiac arrest on the pitch. So in FIFA, and I think in a lot of other sports now, we want, if there's a sudden cardiac arrest, the way we identify it is you see a player going down without any contact, so non-contact collapse. And then you can run directly onto the pitch. You don't need to wait for the referee to call you on. And we want to get the AED on the patient and the player defibrillated within 2 minutes. And of course, the reason for this is not because somebody has done a randomized controlled trial to figure out how many minutes you need to do this in, but the players who've survived were the ones who were defibrillated within 2 minutes. So this is why we do this. And of course, you need to train this because this can happen on the other side of the pitch. So you need to be coordinated, you need to run very quickly, you need to know who's doing what with the defibrillator, who's cutting the jersey, who's putting the pads on, who's reading the defibrillator and so on. And this is what the pitch looks like once the tournament starts. And one of the absolute no-nos in football, especially in the FIFA competitions, is you don't go on the pitch. You cannot do anything on the pitch once the tournament is active. So, and this is not where the pitch ends, in this white line. It ends here. The line between the artificial turf and the real grass, you can see this guy standing here. You can't set your foot on this area. This is on match day, early in the morning. And you can see here, this is full of TV cameras. So if we train for sudden cardiac arrest, where are we going to train? You know, you have that little area there. So basically, you cannot train, you cannot time yourself to see how quickly you get to a player once the tournament has started. You need to do this well in advance. Then also, in FIFA competitions, the equipment we use is standard. So we use a hard board, this yellow board, and we use the blocks. And we threw away all the C-spine collars in the bags. So we don't use it at all anymore. And I know that the IOC doesn't want to use it either. You have the spider straps on the board, and then you have this basket, the orange basket, Stokes basket. And the basket doesn't have any straps, so we threw the straps away as well. So if you have to run onto the pitch for a small injury, you run just for the basket. If you need to run on for something much bigger like concussion or C-spine or any spinal injury or anything else, the team will first go with the basket, and once they realize this is going on, they'll come back and they'll pick up, well, one guy will come back and pick up the board. And then you strap them in and you put them in the basket, but you don't put the straps over the basket. This is all in order to save time, but also to make sure that you secure people properly, etc. So it's quite specific. And of course, you have to train this over and over again. So this is my lesson number 4. Training is crucial, and training before the tournament, not just training during the tournament. This guy was very funny. He's a Russian fan, obviously. And he got a lot of attention from the cameras. And this demonstrates a very important lesson for us. We shouldn't be fans. You can support a team, as I quietly did, but you shouldn't make it obvious. And you shouldn't have outrageous behavior. Also, as is usually the case, people want to know that the medical team are there. They really want us there, but they just don't want to see us. They would much prefer if we were invisible. And I don't know how these doping control guys got caught on a camera like this, but I think the article that went with it was the cameraman wanted to take photos of the doping control. So sometimes you can't avoid it. And I know that it happened to me once. I was going from the player medical room to the pitch, and the tunnel was just chock and block full with cameras. It was impossible to avoid the camera. But yeah, it's a no-no. And this is the biggest no-no of all. The only people who should ever take a selfie with players are the players themselves. So if you catch somebody taking selfies or asking for autographs or anything like that, probably that person will be kicked out of the team. So the lesson here is we have to be professionals. We're not fans. We're doing a job. So, and then of course there's the rules. So this guy was our biggest friend, even though he doesn't look very friendly there. His name is Pierluigi Collina. He's by many people considered to be the world's best referee, and he's now the head of the referee committee in FIFA. And he really was instrumental in disseminating to the referees the new rules that was influenced by the medical concerns, like the concussion rule and the sudden cardiac arrest rule, etc., etc. And so there's some rules that are not so obvious, and this is that when the field of play medical teams are sitting on the sideline, they have to make sure they watch the pitch and not the ball. And this is difficult if it's your team playing and there's a crucial point of the match and the ball is on the other side of the pitch. You're still supposed to look at the pitch because you need to see if somebody has a non-contact collapse. And then also we talked to him about the response to injury. And the way we normally do it is if the player goes down and the physio runs on, the team would stand up and watch what's happening. If the doctor also runs on, they would get ready with their equipment, and then if they get called on, then they just run on the pitch. And this worked really well for most of the tournament until one match where one player went down all the time. And it became ridiculous because they were up, down, up, down, up, down. And eventually I just said, look, don't look at the player, look at the team physician. But the team physician knows this player very well. If the team physician is worried, you get up and you get ready. If the team physician's not doing anything, just stay seated. So, and then of course concussion was once again, unfortunately, a big deal at the World Cup. There were several cases, but this was probably the most controversial one. Noureddin Amrabat, he's a Moroccan player, and in the game against Iran, he clearly got a concussion. And there were a lot of people who criticized the way he was treated on the pitch, and there was a lot of debate about that. I can say my understanding is that the person who squirted the water in his face wasn't the team physician, it was another player. So I think that's not the team physician's fault, that one. But what was clearly the team physician's responsibility is that this guy came back 5 days after his injury to play in another match. And that is completely against all the concussion protocols. So of course you can imagine in the media, FIFA got killed for this because they hadn't done anything about it and it was their responsibility. And there's a lot of calls for the rules to change and for players to be prevented from playing another match until the appropriate time frame has gone past. I don't really want to get involved in the politics of this, and as I say, things may well change. But suffice to say that currently the situation in FIFA is that the team physician has ultimate responsibility for his players, his or her players. And as a FIFA VMO or an LOC VMO, you cannot interfere against the wishes of the team physician. This is a basic principle. So if you're going to change the concussion management there, you're basically taking the responsibility from the team physician and you're giving it, who knows the players, you're giving it to somebody else who doesn't know the players. And you can't just do it for concussion. You know, there are many other situations where this could apply too. So it's a difficult situation. But what is the relevance for us? We need to know in 2022, what is the current situation? And we need to stick to that. Whether you morally agree with it or not, it's your responsibility to stick to the rules. The other thing that FIFA introduced for this tournament was this player stats electronic surveying. So basically they had a tablet on the pitch, on the bench, and then up in the media tribune there was a TV screen and the technical staff could sit there and they could watch the match and they could give information back to the guys on the bench. And that was nice from a technical point of view, but it was actually fantastic from a medical point of view because there was also a space for a medical assistant to sit there. And so the whole idea was that they could look for concussion. And if they recognized possible concussion, they could rewind and look again, look at the mechanism of injury, look at the immediate symptoms, and then they could speak to the team physician and tell them, I think there's a concussion. So, and I think they used it quite a lot for this purpose. So lesson number 6 then is know the rules. I won't talk about VAR, that was quite controversial too, but it's not my field of expertise. So this was the countdown for match day -1. So there were 2 days that were really important at every stadium. It was match day -1 and match day. So as you can see, it's quite busy. You know, you start at 9 o'clock in the morning, you finish at 9:30 at night, and you're busy the whole time. I don't want to go through all of them, but basically, match day -1 is taken up by the official training sessions for each of the 2 teams, excuse me, and then also the match coordination meeting. So, and the field of play people have to be in place 90 minutes before all of this happens. And we try to do some training in between, but it wasn't always possible. But this is when you try to fit things in. The match coordination meeting is really important. It's quite a formal meeting between the 2 teams and the FIFA staff, and you discuss everything about the next day, the protocols, how the ceremonies will go, how the transport times from the hotels down to the last minute, the countdown. It's very, very technical. But medical also gets a chance to discuss the medical issues, and we really discuss 3 points. The first is doping control, the process, and most of them know that by then. The second thing is the injury management on the pitch, the stuff we've just talked about, so we make sure that the team physicians know this. And then the third thing we discuss is drinks breaks. So the next day, on match day, we always go 90 minutes and 60 minutes before kickoff. You go to the middle of the pitch and you do the wet bulb globe temperature, this thermometer here. And if it's more than 28 degrees, then the drinks breaks will be introduced. This is quite a big deal because it affects marketing, media, everything else because of the TV times that change. So, and usually when we go to these competitions, we get one of these thermometers in our bags. But this time, FIFA had looked at the weather patterns well in advance, and they'd identified 3 stadiums where the weather was going to be an issue. And those stadiums got the wet bulb globe thermometers, but we didn't. And I think that was perfectly reasonable. And we didn't need it because it was cool. I mean, not cool, but it was not hot in Samara. The problem was that at one of the match coordination meetings, one of the team managers absolutely insisted that we prove that the temperature is going to be okay. And he had a right to do that, of course. But what it meant was we then had to fly one of these thermometers from another venue at the last minute. Remember, match day was the next day. So it took quite a lot of organization to get that done. So this is where I learned my next lesson, and that is that you have to be prepared for the unexpected. Even if you think you can predict what's going to happen, you can't. So be prepared. This was match day. Match day is even more busy than match day -1. Again, we start at 9, we finish 5 hours after the kickoff, or maybe sometimes more. And this was an early kickoff, 4 o'clock, but most of them was 6 or 7 or later. And basically that yellow block there, this is the first 4 to 5 hours. You just spend the whole time checking medical stations, medical equipment, staff, checking that everything is correct and in place. And it took enormously long the first time. First match was 5 hours, and I didn't get everything done in time. And by the last match, it took 2 hours. And the only reason for that is because we had the same staff with the same equipment who knew the drill. And it goes to show how much difference it can make if you use the same people, consistent teams. And then you can see from 90 minutes before kickoff to kickoff, it gets hectic. So sometimes your time is divided into 5 or 10-minute blocks. And these are just for routine jobs. So if anything happened untowards there, you have almost no time to try and sort it out. And then, of course, and we still did field of play training as well in between all of this. And then, of course, I had to do the doping control too. So you have to set up the doping control room. You have to get everything ready. We did blood and urine for biological passport. So it's really full on game day. And I was lucky because these guys I worked with were really good and proactive and autonomous. So I didn't have a problem. But I know some of my FIFA colleagues in other departments did say that sometimes they found it difficult to get things done on game day because in Russia there's a very vertical structure. So some people can't make a decision on the spot without going through Moscow to get it checked off or approved. And you can imagine if you have such a tight schedule, it doesn't work. This is an important lesson for us to learn. We have to give people the freedom to make their decisions on the ground in a situation like that. So this is my next lesson. Give people space. Give them space to do what they do because they've done this before. Give them a little bit of autonomy. Don't micromanage them. This slide unfortunately demonstrates one of the own goals. I had been so impressed with the medical services in Russia, and my trust in them just grew as time went past. And then I learned a very, very important lesson, and that is that you cannot always control everybody under your responsibility. But it's not what they do, it's how you respond to it that eventually defines how people see you. So what happened here was, I don't want to go into too much detail, but this is the FIFA hotel. This is the ambulance that's parked outside the FIFA hotel. And I checked every ambulance except for this one. And the reason I didn't check this one is because there was very little time, but also because it changed every day. Every day it was a different crew that was there. So I was in the gym and one of the FIFA staff came to me and had basically a brain bleed. And he deteriorated in front of my eyes. And so I got him to the ambulance, and when I got to the ambulance, some of the equipment wasn't working, and the staff were not the same quality as the staff I've met in the other areas. So this was a really big problem for me because I honestly thought this guy's going to die in front of me. So I managed to get him off to the hospital. I couldn't go with him because it was match day. And I phoned the VMO and I said, you need to organize a reception party. They were there in 15 minutes, and when they got there, there was a reception to get this guy in. And to be honest, after that, the medical treatment was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. He spent a week in ICU, and he survived. In fact, he survived without any problems. But the lesson I learned here was the response. So after that, I went to the stadium and I spoke to the VMO and I said, look, this is completely unacceptable. I know this is a one-off, but it just happened at a crucial time. And normally you would expect people to be a little bit defensive and find excuses, and not this guy. He just turned around, he took it extremely seriously. And I was told the medical debrief meeting that evening went on way past midnight. And when I got to the stadium the next day, the ambulances were lined up in a row All the equipment were ready to be checked. It was just, the response was incredible. And there was nothing out of place. So this is probably the second most important lesson I learned is learn to deal with your own goals. Mistakes will happen. Things will happen, you can't always control it, but it is how you respond to it that defines who you are. So I wanted to give you an idea of what we can expect. So I'm not a match scheduler, so I just did this using my common sense. This is so it might not look like this, but this is the Russia timetable, and there were 12 stadiums, and it went over 32 days. And this is Qatar. Currently, there will be 8 stadiums, and it will go over 28 days, so it's a little bit shorter. It will finish on National Day, the 18th of December. Now, this is what the matches look like. You can see each stadium has a few gaps where you can fix problems and you can sort out issues and people can rest and so on. If we assume that the final stages will look the same, because remember you need these rest days because it's the same teams that will be in the quarterfinals, semifinals and finals, so they need the rest. You can't squeeze that too much. And if we assume that the initial match will be on its own in one day, which is normally what they want to do for TV reasons, then this is what it's going to look like in the stadiums. There's no rest days at all. And you saw the schedule for match day -1 and match day. It's busy. It's like 12 to 14 hours. So if we assume that Aspetar staff will be involved in player care primarily, it means that we need 12 people per stadium, and we're going to need 8 stadiums, so we're talking 96 people. And then we have a few people extra also because, in case of sickness and so on. So let's call it 100 people. And then if you want to give people a rest, because this is going to be more than 2 weeks non-stop, maybe you have 2 teams for each stadium. So that makes 200 people that need to know, that need to have this kind of knowledge, that need to be trained in advance. So you can see the scale of it and where we are going to come in and what role we're going to play. So this is another lesson for me. Your subs are really important. Don't just think about the primary team you're going to put on. Think about the team that's going to relieve them. And maybe our primary team will be double the size of a normal team. And I want to finish off. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed this. These are 2 presents that I've been given. One was on my arrival, and this was when I left. And actually, I've got it here. So the arrival one is this little booklet. It's called Samara Football Health and Sightseeing. And this demonstrated to me how committed this team was. So inside this book, you will find a lot of information on Samara, the city, places to see, sightseeing activities. Then also a lot of things about the stadium, including stadium maps and which clinics there would be and who's in charge of which clinics and so on. And then it also has a Russian-English dictionary on many different things like travel items, medical items. It's just incredible. And this, of course, didn't happen in a week or a month. I think it didn't even happen in a year. It took us 2 years to make that book, right? So this was commitment, and this is not one of the FIFA requirements. Similarly, with this jersey here, this is the jersey they gave me. It's got a nice logo on the front, and then it has this written stuff on the back. And this is what's written on it. You can see, it's all about the Samara medical team. So again, this took a lot of effort to get it made, to come up with a design, etc., etc. What did it tell me? It told me that, just like us, when this team stood in front of this challenge 4 years before or 2 years before, they weren't thinking, oh yeah, we want to be there or we want to participate. They wanted to be the best. They wanted to win the medical equivalent of the World Cup. And to be honest with you, I think they've got the trophy at the moment. So the question we now have is, how do we get better than that? And I know that the medical staff for 2010 and other areas have been appointed or have started working 2 years in advance. And that's fine. If we want to do the same, we can do that. But I think for us here at Aspetar, if we want to be a world leader, and we want to win the medical equivalent of the World Cup, we've got to start working on this now. It means that we have to get this goal in our mind, and we have to always keep that goal. Whatever we do, it's about winning the World Cup. And so this is my last lesson, my 11th lesson, is keep your eye on the ball from the beginning and don't lose sight of where you're going until the end.